So you got triggered when you saw this thumbnail, right? Yeah, I'm talking to you that just clicked on this video. Yep, you did? Okay, I did too when I was working on it. Now, keep in mind, I am going to be fixing this machine and getting it up to snuff, which that's why you're here watching it. But if you don't cringe at least once or twice whenever watching this video, then this video did not do what it needed to, because this is probably one of the nastiest machines that I've ever worked on. All right, let's get in the nitty gritty of this video. Start that funky beat. These are my 3 main steps to avoid heat issues with a gaming PC. You need to be keeping track of 1, that the computer is not sitting on the ground. 2, that the computer itself is cleaned regularly. I would say every maybe 2 to 3 months, dusted. Number 3, making sure that everything is taken care of with the machine in regards to making sure that it can perform at its best ability. And yeah, that number 3 is pretty generic, but what I mean is that if you're a PC owner, the way it works is that cool air comes in, hot air goes out. You want to make sure that is always occurring. Dust will kill that whole mechanic. And what happens when the heat stays in? The parts start melting, and it's not a good sign. So you definitely want to make sure that the machine itself is in a very good position. Okay, with that out of the way, let's dive into the computer itself. This computer actually has a overheating issue with the CPU. I mean, I really couldn't see the reason why. We're going to go through this machine and we're going to blow it out multiple different times. On the first time blowing it out, I ended up pulling off the side panel, and you could definitely tell there's particles of the massively huge nature going on here. As you can see the camera, all that nicotine, everything else sticks to the dust and ends up collecting like that, which can definitely above and beyond add to heating issues, any sort of issues when it involves anything with heating, cooling, and any of the items that utilize fans. Graphics card, the power supply, the AIO cooler that's up at the top. It's probably what's stemming the whole situation, but we're gonna just figure out what's going on here. And on both sides of the cooler, it's completely packed full of dust. This is just the outboard side that's actually pushing the air up through the cooler, and it's just beyond it is beyond dusty, to say the least. The back fan portion here is definitely caked as well, so we're hitting that a few times here, trying to get it back up to par and trying to get all the nastiness out of it. Just look at that, it's like the Dust Bowl of 2021. It's wintertime here. Normally we're used to seeing snow, but not of the dust variety. This is beyond anything I've seen in a very long time. And if you're asking, yes, I was wearing a mask at the time, and also this is in my garage. I had the door open too at the same time, so I did not get to breathe in all this nastiness and foul and filth. This is dust cleaning number 2. I ended up blowing it out. The AIO cooler specifically, you can see right there on the fan blades that it's collecting really bad, and we just want to get rid of that. So let's get in there with some pressurized air and clean that out. With all the additional portions of the machine, you can check here on the bottom, we definitely have more particulates, to say the least. It's just ugh. The dust definitely holds no bounds. It is so caked, it's so disgusting, but it's definitely going to do good for the computer in the long term, so that we can determine what's happening with the computer and figure out that exact issue with the heating, pinpoint the issue, rather than just letting the computer go and letting it go off to the wayside. This is definitely going to help out the lifespan of the computer. Total amount of times that I did end up blowing out this machine, I blew it out 3 different times. The front panels as well, those panels were also caked with dust inside of the filters. You can see me kind of blowing it in the back here, using the compressed air to blow out all the particulates and the ventilation. You can see it's just coming right out of the vents, and it's completely disgusting. All right, after 3 complete blowouts with the air compressor here, it is now at least somewhat manageable, so I can at least test it. That's the main thing that we're looking for. We're trying to figure out about the heat situation and determine if it's able to get enough air now, because of the fact we cleaned out roughly about 50 pounds worth of dust, or a small animal. All right, first time booting it up, we're gonna see exactly what's happening with the machine and get a good temperature and figure out what's going on. Now that we got most of the dust out of it, we can figure out that if it's just because of the dust or if it's because of something further going on with the machine. The fans are working with the AIO cooler. The fans are running. It is pushing air through, so it is operational in that regard. So we're going to be trying to figure out if the pump itself is bad. Nice MSI gaming BIOS there. Oh, that is not good. It started off at 60 degrees Celsius right off the rip. That is definitely not the temperature to be looking at when you're using an AIO, a self-contained liquid cooled system. And just leaving it on, you can see that the temperature just keeps going up and up. And that is a very hot temperature to be whenever you're in just the BIOS itself. With an AIO cooler, you probably wouldn't even want to get this hot, but with like a fan cooler, you might get this hot under a very stressful, heavy load. With what's going on here, this is definitely irregular and not right. So that CPU is not getting cooled whatsoever. Which, going through the BIOS here and figuring out the RPMs of the fans and figuring out what's going on, the pump itself is also registered as one of the fans, so we can see if there's any sort of movement going on there, which there wasn't when we went through the BIOS here. So we ended up determining that the AIO cooler was not operational in the pump side of things. The pump wasn't pumping the hot water from the point of the CPU through the tubes to the radiator, cooling from the radiator, and then back to the CPU. So it was toast, to say the least. I'm taking out the AIO cooler and kind of showing you what's going on there. Pretty much what we're doing right now is we're looking at the individual like AIO cooler I just pulled out and how bad it looks. I mean, look at that. Like, right inside of the fans, it's completely caked with dust and stuff that after 3 times of trying to use an air compressor and getting all that stuff out, it still didn't get everything. So, and then also if you look at the heatsink itself, the heatsink itself is also caked with it on the outside portions, and you can definitely tell that the thermal paste was fairly dried up and nastified, so we ended up replacing that. Now, inside of the case, I did do some upgrades. The case itself had no really good intake. It had 2 outtakes, but no intakes for cool air. And this specific case had a nice little channel on the bottom side of the case. So what I did was I installed a really high RPM fan that I had extra, and it's going to be intaking the cool air up into the case and having it cross with the GPU, trying to help it keep it cool, and then also up to the radiator to have that cool air assist with the cool air / hot air coming back up through the radiator. This specific AIO cooler is an MSI Core Liquid 240R. There's no sponsor or anything, but we wanted to check this out. This is going to be the replacement for the previous AIO cooler. Same 240 rad with the self-contained AIO setup, and it does have RGB, but we're not going to be hooking up the RGB because it doesn't have an RGB panel whatsoever or any sort of interface. Time for the AIO to get put back in and get that all hooked up and ready to go, and then definitely see there's screws everywhere. When putting on the AIO cooler, you definitely want to line it up so that you're not going to have a lot of torque or tension on the tubes whenever you go to mount the heatsink onto the board. So that's something that you want to just put in a couple screws in the top so that it's still adjustable and there's not a lot of like stress going on the radiator itself. Kind of like a shortcut, and makes it a lot easier when you're putting on the heatsink. There is hardware that comes with the new AIO cooler so that it can be adapted. This is the bracket that we're going to be utilizing. This is for the Intel chipsets because this one's a Intel i5 in this machine. The bracket's really easy to work with, and the way that the stoppers and like back pieces are, it makes it really nice and very easy for a single individual to put it on. There is a system there where it'll lock into place whenever the screw gets tightened to a certain point. That head on the screw ends up locking into the mounting bracket. It's a nice little setup. Like with this washer, it's like a standoff that'll keep everything in place whenever I go to mount it through the back of the motherboard. This is the bracket you just saw. We're going to be using this square bracket in tandem with the plastic kind of like ring support mechanism that works with that bracket, and it keeps everything in place. It's a really nice little setup. A little difficult whenever I was trying to get it in, just try to get the screws in place and to keep the tension off of everything, because if you can keep the tension off of the heatsink, makes it a lot easier to install. All right, and right here that you're looking at, you want to make sure that you're tightening the screws in a kind of a crisscross pattern with the AIO cooler itself on the heatsink. And this specific heatsink's got a nice little feature where you can adjust the symbol if you want to make sure it's upright, because I know every PC's got different mounting locations for the cooler, so it makes it really convenient. If you're going to ask, yes, I did end up redoing the thermal paste, and I ended up using Antec Diamond brand thermal paste. I've been using it for years. It's a very, very nice thermal paste, and it's very durable. It does not dry up in a short amount of time in comparison to the generic thermal paste that you end up getting with CPUs or any sort of heat sinks or anything like that. Then normally the generic stuff doesn't last too long. And this is definitely not sponsored or anything. It's just what I normally use. So this is going to be the test run with the new heatsink. That looks a lot better. At 26 degrees Celsius right off the rip, that is what we're looking for, and fluctuates within a degree to 2 degrees with that AIO cooler, and that's what we're looking for. 26 degrees is a phenomenal temperature to be at. The cooling is great. The smart fans aren't freaking out right now because of the fact of the heat. So there's like little to no heat going on right now. So the cooler is doing what it needs to be doing. We're going to go through some of the fans here and kind of see what kind of performance is. But I mean, this is just more or less stats for nerds at this point, because it shows you the graphical RPM fan curve of everything. At least temperature wise, it's very, very good right off the rip, and it boots up great, operates really great. This machine was in the top 5 nastiest machines I've ever worked on in my IT career, and it was pretty foul. You saw all the clips from before. It was it was so bad. All right, so you survived to the end of the video. This computer was nasty, to say the least. If you didn't at least cringe once or twice, I don't know what kind of computers you've been working on, but definitely like and subscribe if it helped you out, if it gave you some information, and comment down below. Let me know how bad this computer was, and let me know if there's any additional content you guys want to see from me, or if there was even something I missed.